I don't think I've actually been a regenerative farmer for over 30 years. I didn't realise. I thought I started out. We live on a small farm, a small lot of land, but started off on the concept of permaculture 30 plus years ago. I don't think I'm a really good permaculture farmer or a regenerate farmer, but we do have chickens going everywhere. I have got sheep that regularly get out. We've tried our pathway with cattle and Scottish Highland cattle, and it really didn't like me after I fed it some feed and it bucked my hand hit into the electric wire. I zapped it with 6,000 volts through, and it waited and waited and waited, and 3 months later it kicked me. Got rid of them. What's this person famous for? Well, she lived to 96, didn't she? She was in pretty good nick. We've all got to admit that. Or else she's dead now. It proves the point, we all die. What's her most famous claim to fame? Don't say Charles. She was a low carber. You think about it, royalty. Royalty has the Crown land. They have full access to animal fat, protein, complete diet. Where the commoners get the commons for the grain. Dumb the people down. Marie Antoinette most famously did not say, but because I've tracked it down, let them eat cake. Let the commoners eat cake. Let the royalty have the protein and the fat, and whoever controls the protein controls the people. And you may or may not have heard me speak and Belinda speak about that for a long time. So this is sort of what low-carb healthy fat is. I acknowledge I have conflict of interest. I have lowcarbhealthyfat.com and it's got nothing on it. But I registered a long time ago. So it is essentially an animal-based protein and fat diet with a helping of some vegetables there. And so I talk about the evolution of diet in the modern world. We've got the SAD diet, which is crap food, and standard American diet, standard Australian diet, whichever way you call it. And then as you get sick, you actually move towards low-carb healthy fat. Or then you move to the food pyramid, which doesn't work. Then you move to low-carb healthy fat, and then some people will move towards keto for their health benefits, and some people will move towards carnivore. So it's an evolution, and most people in this space, lecturing around the world, quite a few vegans there, because vegans actually, well-intentioned, want to make themselves healthier, want to make the planet healthier, but ultimately get sick, nutritionally depleted. They move to LCHF, then they move to keto, then they move to carnivore. And some of the most well-known speakers around the world used to be vegan and are now carnivore. So if you go to a carnivore conference around the world, I can tell you, if there's a buffet, everyone's at the meat. So it's really interesting. But what we all, I think, agree on is let's not eat all of this stuff, highly processed, white stuff. And when people say, look, if you want to be carnivore, you want to be keto, well, okay, I think it's really important that you eat the Mediterranean diet, right? So nobody's ever defined the Mediterranean diet. And I always laugh and say, oh, the Mediterranean diet's really fit, it's really healthy for you. What is the Mediterranean diet? Nobody's ever described it. And they can't, because the Mediterranean diet is bordered by 21 countries. Is it the Moroccan diet, the Lebanese diet, the Greek diet, the French diet, whatever? Here's my crime, because life's got to be reduced to memes and stuff like that. So this is something I stand by. I've been talking about it for a long time. I'm very happily the first person in the world to describe this combination. And then you get into trouble. Sugar makes you hungry, carbohydrates make you fat, and polyunsaturated oils make you inflamed and sick. I do have a conflict of interest. I am an Australian red meat ambassador. They've given me that title and I have been paid absolutely nothing for it. Occasionally the local butchers know that I'm an Australian red meat ambassador and I get some nice steaks. I think we all agree with this quote, if you're in this regenerative space, the nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. And I'll come back to that. So is it safe to eat real food? That's really the question. And I'm going to give you a whole lot of conversation starter points and some conversation stopper points. I can't possibly cover everything that's in my head because we will be still going in a week. And if you get Belinda up here on stage, we'll be going for a month, okay? And that will be just with water and urine breaks. So there's so much to tell you, so much information. A lot of it we've got on our YouTube. We've done podcasts all around the world. But I want to try and give you points that mean that if you wish to practice this as an individual, you want to advise this as a healthcare professional at any level, it is safe. If you're a farmer and you have an interest in it, I'm going to give you some points which may be helpful in a conversation. And if you're going to be worried about the police, I'm going to show you how we've broken the regulators and how it's safe to go forward in this space for us all. And that's critical. Now, the other thing which is really important today is most of you won't remember any of this. If you've done a good talk, people will remember 2, maybe 3 points from it. So just relax, don't concentrate too much, okay? I think it's been recorded. Over the years, I believe that the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, APRA, you've got to understand that they oversee nearly 900,000 practitioners in Australia who practice defensively because of fear of the regulator. Stupidly, all the members pay for them to actually do that to themselves. But they are a broken, malignant and incompetent process, and I've spoken about that publicly. I've actually spoken to them directly. But I'm going to show you. So when you do get reported to APRA, give me a call because I will help you. And someone here's already given me a thank you card today. There's Abby, thank you. I have a 100% success rate of getting you off, apart from 2 nurses in Queensland whose cases are before the Supreme Court and their legal team say they're going to win and APRA is going to lose badly. Here's the ancestral diet. Okay, we've all evolved over that. You'll hear that term over and over, and I'll use it interchangeably with other terms, but nonetheless, the ancestral diet is how we got to the top of the food chain. It's where we are. Managed to do it over a couple of 100,000 years, and then we've been approached with a non-ancestral diet, which hasn't been nearly as effective. You know, it's a shitty topic, but organic matter is good for our soil. And if we don't look after our soil, then we end up with poor soil and poor poo. So I want to talk about the land. If we think that we have healthy soil, then we will develop and grow healthy plants, and as a result, the animals that feed upon that, including ourselves, if we want to go that path, with healthy animals. I actually prefer to have my plants generally processed by animals before I eat them. You end up with healthy food, and then we end up with healthy people. So is it safe to eat real food from the land aspect? So if we look at our modern agricultural practice is essentially environmental disaster. Modern cropping path techniques are just incorrect. We've gotten it wrong for the last few hundred years in particular, and probably the last couple of thousand years if you look around the Mediterranean. So hands up, what's the greatest, anybody know what the greatest agricultural export in the world is by volume? Wheat, grain? No, you're all wrong. Topsoil. So topsoil by far and away is the greatest agricultural export of the world. And if you do this sort of farming, you are, I'll keep saying plant-based agriculture, robs nutrition from the soil, and animal-based agriculture, traditionally with regenerative farming techniques and ancient, and it's hundreds of years, has actually put nutrition back into the soil. Great Barrier Reef, after the rainstorms, that's not chemicals just going out there, that's topsoil. If we look at the agricultural area of the US, that huge basin associated with the Mississippi River has all pours into the now officially called the Gulf of America, and check it on Google Maps. Okay, Google Maps now has Gulf of America. It's in brackets under Gulf of Mexico, but I thought we have changed. And in fact, once you actually put all that topsoil in there and you throw a few chemicals in there, that water becomes hypoxic and it's sterile. The Gulf of Mexico is pretty sterile, as are parts of the Great Barrier Reef. And it's the chemicals and the plant-based agriculture which is doing that. So when they say it's all stuff from cows, it's not. So if we were to take a rough idea of the population of the world, I checked the calculator the other day, which changes 8.2 billion people. So there's 8.2 human beings living on the planet at the moment. And what's really interesting, if you take a tablespoon of dirt or a tablespoon of manure, how many living creatures are in that? About 8.2 billion. So every time we till the soil, we turn the soil over, we are destroying the habitat of more people on the planet per tablespoon of dirt. And that's lives. If you're actually a vegan, you're really worried about that. Okay, well, what do we decide to be what's called a sentient being? I'm not talking about little moles and mice and all that sort of thing. Living creatures in our soil which are trying to do the right thing, we're destroying their habitat. So just a little bit snippet. Almonds. Okay, how much water do you need to make one almond? Estimated 12 litres per almond. 1 to 12. Somewhere between 8 and 15, but the California studies say about 12. And so California, biggest almond growing part of the world, that whole dark area in the middle is their artesian basin, which is the water levels dropping and dropping and dropping because the amount of water that's being used in that, let alone the bees that are moving east and west across the United States and losing their habitat. So I think plant-based agriculture robs our soil, throw in a bit of wind without that nutrient-rich topsoil, and we've got that. So plant-based takes organic matter, or organic animal-based restores it. What about organic matter? I mean, this is a bit regenerative at the moment, which is what we hear about. So in the last 10 years, there's been about a 30% reduction in organic matter in our topsoil. Whether or not it's 20% or 50% or whatever, it depends on which data you look at in different parts of the world. And there's roughly about an 80% reduction in the last 100 years. And what does that mean for water retention? If you can increase or decrease by 1%, that's the equivalent of about 20,000 gallons of water that can be retained per acre. I realise that's imperial there. What's that? Nearly 100,000 litres per acre times 4.2. So 400,000 plus litres of water per hectare that can be, it's not bad up here on the podium. See, I'm a carnivore, my brain's actually working. I do mathematics on the run. I've also been happily married for 40 years, so most men will understand that you need to think very quickly on your feet. So it's really important to put organic matter into the soil and retain it. And if we can, which is regenerative farming, rather than just maintaining it, regenerative farming is actually putting it back in. I think this is a great book, because again, you want more and more information. Dirt, The Erosion of Civilization by David Montgomery. Tracks all this beautifully. Most of our depressions, I found out that really the fall of the Roman Empire was actually related to its agricultural practice. As they moved more and more around the Mediterranean, you've got to realise that the Middle East used to be a temperate rainforest. Whoa, it's all desert now, or it's largely desert. And literally the way they stripped the topsoil, they unable to provide enough food supply for their empire. Collapse by Jared Diamond. Any of you read any of his books? Jared Diamond, brilliant. And I'm not being depressive, because the whole thing about that is we have to make action because we're outstripping our planet. It's not just an island anymore, which is clearly Jared Diamond's work. We're outstripping our planet, and we've all got a role to play. I'm going to gloss over a bit of vegetarian vegan propaganda. The system's holding us to gunpoint at the moment. So here's about permanent cropland in the planet, which is increasing over the last 60 years. And more of it's being turned over to cereal production, quite a dramatic increase. And the yield's actually increasing dramatically. So if we actually look at a percentage, the amount of cropland, and there's only around about 4% of cropland on the world, I'll show you that, is increased by, 14%. The amount of land use related to cereal is actually now increased by 40%, but the yield's increased by 294% over the last 60 years. How has that happened? Chemicals. Chemicals in our soil, chemicals in our food. It's the only way. It has not happened because of organic matter. Because we've stripped our organic matter. There's a whole lot of phosphate. Used to be islands in the middle of the Atlantic, and the islands have disappeared because they've mined the organic matter from them. So we're now using chemicals. It's not organic matter saving us. So here's by land use. The amount of land on the planet that's available for cultivation is about 4%. Whereas that associated with forest and rangelands is another 24%. Now, that's available for animal-based agriculture. And the Australian meat industry, Meat and Livestock Australia, and various bodies within it, have been trying to actually work with forestry around Australia to try and have cattle and sheep grazing our native forests in a sustainable fashion, which would decrease the bushfire risk dramatically. How much success have they had? Zero. But anyway, so that's where some of the meat industry is actually being proactive. Most of the things they're doing are useless, but nonetheless, they're trying. So I think that's a really sensible idea. Every time I catch up with a politician, I offer them money and then I offer them advice. Never ask anything from a politician, only ever offer them money. So every time I meet up with the federal minister, I say, I'd like to offer you $50 billion per annum in health savings. I caught up with our treasurer at one point in time. I was wrong at the time, I offered him only $500 million per annum. And I think I underestimated it. And I said, but you're going to have to put your balls on the line. And I told Belinda about that. She didn't really say that to the treasurer. Maybe I did. And who is, he used to be he was treasurer at the time, moved up to premier, and he's low carb, keto, carnivore. And wasn't pretty good nick. And when he actually went that way, he started thinking properly and he left politics. So I think there's a whole lot of land use. And how is our land actually used? I talked roughly about the increase in the amount of cereal requirements. And contrary to popular belief, 65% of grain production, cereal production in the world actually goes to humans. Okay? So it's not just going to animals. And when you actually break down the amount of food that's going to the feed market, well, poultry 45%, 26% to pigs, and 20% to ruminants. So it's not going, all the feed in the world's actually being put to actually cattle grazing. That's just literally BS because it's not cows. Now, one of the things we've been told about is that we have to eat by the guidelines. This is data over about 50 years, from 1970 to 2014. I've tried finding a graph for the last 10 years, but I haven't been able to find it. So we've done exactly as the dietary guidelines have recommended. We have increased our intake of cereals and grains. We've decreased our intake of red meat. We've increased our amount of poultry, which is the pinkish colour there, and we've increased our nuts and legumes as a method of protein. So we're doing exactly as the dietary guidelines say. We've increased our fruit intake, we've increased our vegetable intake, and we've decreased our dairy intake. And if you look at food production across the world, we have seen that we're predominantly cereals and we're not actually producing a lot of meat overall. And despite us all following the dietary guidelines of the world for the last 50 years, we've gotten fatter and sicker. So when people say, people aren't eating by the dietary guidelines, well, again, that's nonsense. Here's the international statistics. Now, I do believe in animal rights. There's a whole lot of propaganda out there. And first I'm going to talk about methane. What's the biggest producer of methane on the planet? Correct. Nearly 20% of the methane production from the animal kingdom, the greatest producer from the animal kingdom is termites, cockroaches, millipedes and scarab beetles. Not cows, which is actually a green production of methane. It all gets cycled back in. But we don't actually hear of the world going around, it's going to kill every single cockroach. Well, that won't work. It's survived us for a long time. So termites, which we don't have any in Tasmania unless I bring them back in the car. Never seen a scarab beetle apart from in pyramid mystery stories. But nonetheless, so there's this little tip for you. How come when people say, cows produce methane? Well, so what's a bigger producer of methane on the planet? And nobody apart from someone who's in the know, will say termites. Carbon footprints. Most people here in the regenerative area understand the concept that Yes, okay, sure, there's a little bit of methane production, but that's a part of a green methane cycle. Yes, there's a bit of carbon CO2 production as a result of our farming practices, but that's minimal. But the vast majority of good farming practice restores carbon to the soil, and it's a net positive. I love propaganda movies. I have to take some anti-nauseas before I watch them. And most times I can't get through them. But just a little snippet of knowledge that Game Changers came out in 2018, a whole lot of, rah, 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 you're going to be an elite sports person. Every single person that was in Game Changers in the following 2 years had a reduction in their ability and their performance. Okay, just another snippet of information. Again, going to give you a couple of books to read or advice. Cows Save the Planet. Anybody read that book? What's the really important book? What's the really, really most important thing about that book? Judith Schwartz is a vegan. She is a lawyer and she's a cattle producer. So when people say, oh, you're actually spouting nonsense, well, I say, well, actually, here's a vegan who actually is a cattle producer who's written a book called Cows Save the Planet, and I've bought a few copies of that and sent them to politicians. And then this is out recently, Why Vegans Have Smaller Brains. I haven't quite finished it, but I didn't really need to get past page 10 because they talk about me in it. I've been asked to write the foreword to a book. There's no carnivore books in France, so there's a French author who's actually asked me to proofread his book and actually write the foreword for it. And again, what's interesting, he talks about certain characters, Baker, Fettke. Anthony didn't get into that. I've got to mention it to him if he catches up today. I'll come back to certain people in that space because I'll mention it now. Okay, Sean Baker, Ken Berry, Anthony Chaffee, myself, we've all been caught up with our medical boards, and I've assisted those three guys to get off. There's a way to do it. So what about the people? Okay, is it safe for people to eat this way? Well, very clearly the non-ancestral diet doesn't work. And I think we've been exposed to a social experiment for the last 60, 70 years. Now, I apologise if this appears to be inappropriate, but I asked for an AI-generated image with a scientist experimenting on people eating junk food. And I'm not kidding, it kept coming back with a white person looking through a window with African Americans on one side and Hispanics on the other eating crap food. But what AI does is takes the consummate knowledge of society, and I think there's something quite subtle here. We have been experimenting on people for a long period of time. I'd rather be awake than woke, but nonetheless, I tried. So here's the social experiment, eat by the food pyramid, you will die by the food pyramid, and along the way you will look like the food pyramid. Our health system is bursting at the seams. It's not a health system. It's actually fully appropriately known as a sickness industry. And I do think our social experiment of food is the primary, and lifestyle is the primary issue. I think it's really, really important to understand latest study looking at metabolic health. Okay, it's in the US, up to 2018 data, it's 2022 published. It's the last study which looks at this. It's no different in Australia. 93.2% of the population are metabolically unwell. It's really, really important to dwell on that. It's the same here in Australia. You've got to walk down the street to see that. I actually think that 93.2% of the population, on the average, are insulin resistant, intolerant of carbohydrate and processed food. And therefore, all of the dietary guidelines being written around the world are for healthy people. So I am a major advocate at many levels that we have condition-specific interventions, condition-specific dietary guidelines. So that's why we're talking about diabetes, because 93% of the population have got diabetes or pre-diabetes or are insulin resistant. So I've come up with a dietary guideline for diabetes. We're actually applicable to 93.2% of the population. This is the way you work around government. I've tried the direct full frontal assault, it gets me into trouble. My middle name is Teflon for the amount of stuff that's been thrown on it and it doesn't stick. So we've looked at obesity rates. Doesn't matter if this is the US or Australia, they're skyrocketing. If we look at diabetes rates here in Australia, this is data over the last 36 years. We look at breast cancer rates, it's all in the same trajectory. If we look at mental health issues, it's all in the same trajectory. And again, if we look at the root cause of all disease, big bold statement, inflammation sits underneath it. When you look at it, it's all inflammation. Doesn't matter if it's diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, mental health, autoimmune disease, neurological problems, it's all inflammation. So if we can find out the cause of that inflammation, then we might be onto something. So nearly 12, 13 years ago, I came up with this nutritional model, okay? Because this is impossible to prove. You can never do a double-blind controlled study over 100 years on 10 million people. But nonetheless, this is my model. The combination of sugar, particularly fructose, refined carbohydrate, high doses of glucose, and polyunsaturated seed oils is highly inflammatory. I think that's the toxic aspect. I go into great details in my talks around inflammation, which are all available on YouTube, and I make this complex situation here of oxidation, release of oxygen, free radicals, and how it all happens. It's pretty easy to understand because I got reported, one of the reasons I got reported to the medical board was I made my talks too easy so that people could understand them. Not kidding. And I was reported, and even if I was shown to be right, I was never allowed to talk about it. Even if it became best practice, I was not allowed to talk about it. Not very good about not talking. So this is a nutritional model of modern disease. I completely agree that it's not quite as simple. I do think it's the basic. We pay more attention to what fuel we put in our cars than we put into our bodies. And you can go along and wash the tyres and clean the car and vacuum it all, but unless you put the right fuel in the car, you're going to be in and out of the repair shop paying bills. So what's the other stuff? Well, stress, cortisol, genetics, chemicals in the system, bowel organisms. I've got some theories about that. Exercise, where you live, the amount of exposure to light, longitude, Polynesian neighbours. The further you go across the Pacific, the more insulin resistant you are. That's the only way they survived on the raft. And then when they come back to Western food, that's why our Polynesian neighbours. The blue continent are the 10 highest rates of obesity in the world, and the first 9 out of 10 for diabetes in the world. So when everyone says my country's worse than the other one, forget it. What's number 10 for diabetes rates in the world? Kuwait. Why? Islamic State don't drink alcohol, so they drink heaps of Coca-Cola. Sleep's really important. I got sleep because I didn't go to Sydney. Vitamin D, critical. Made from cholesterol. Why reduce your cholesterol? Because it's the precursor to vitamin D. Why would you be on a statin? Reduces your vitamin D, blah, blah, blah. Artificial lighting, backs up completely on board. It's really hard to go to light manufacturers. We're building again and go to light manufacturers. Tell me the spectrum of light that you're producing. And I'm not going to, but it's just really fascinating how remember the old street lights used to have a red glow to them? LEDs don't. And they look in the distance. We're screwing ourselves. I think it's a critical factor. For me, I think it's our nutrition first. So if you've got a kid with a nut allergy, you don't give them nuts and then follow it up with an EpiPen, do you? So for me, you can change that over for carbohydrates, processed food, modern diet. It's no good for me. And I think I'm allergic and I don't want the antidote. So because I'm not just a complainer, I have actually come up, I think it's really important to be proactive and so come up with solutions rather than problems. So I've written the dietary guidelines for the world and the animal kingdom. And these dietary guidelines have been taken to the National Health and Medical Research Council. They're currently spending about $20 million on rewriting the dietary guidelines, and they're all conflicted with vested interests again. And I've offered to sell them this sentence for $2 million because I'm right. And I'd like someone to argue with me because I'm undefeated on this one. Eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food produce according to your cultural beliefs and environment, reducing added sugars and processed food. When you take that apart, I have described low carb, healthy fat, keto, carnivore. The only foods that are available all year round are animal-based products. So I've very subtly written low-carb, keto, carnivore in one sentence, which you can't argue with. It's a bit like the Mediterranean diet. Like the Mediterranean diet, which is largely animal-based, historically. So when people say, what do you eat? I'm eating the Mediterranean diet. They can't argue with you. Can you serve me the Mediterranean diet? I'd like to eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food. That's supporting your local farmer. It's taking food mileage out of it. It's so bloody simple. Anyway, so I'm just going to give you a case study about proving how effective low carb is. And Rob's a good mate. And when I take him to the supermarket, he doesn't particularly like what I'm talking about. He rang me up one weekend. I have his permission to talk about this. He was crook. He had brain fog, polyuria, a heap of sugar in his urine. His random blood glucose was 23.1. He was out of control. HbA1c, which should be less than 6.5. I should argue it's probably less than 5.7 if you don't want. He had out of control type 2 diabetes, but he wasn't acidotic. And he rang me up and I said, well, okay, Rob, it's pretty serious. This is, you could go to hospital, you can consider drugs. This is an orthopedic surgeon here talking. All you can do, as I've been talking about for a long time, you go low carb immediately. With Sam, this is one of Belinda's terms. I really think everyone in the room should ever remember you need Sam in your life. If you're going to do anything, particularly you need support, you need accountability, you need to be motivated. Sam, Sam, Sam. I keep coming back to that. Put a glucose monitor on him. I think this is brilliant. For educational purposes, you learn so much so quickly. And I've got all these proposals with government to try and do this at a hospital level. So here he is on day one, way up. But I said, stop eating now. Just have water, a bit of fluid. And it started coming down pretty predictably. He is on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. There he was. 2 weeks later, 100% of the time, normal, and an estimated HbA1c of 5.7. 2 weeks later, I realised it takes 3 months to get the accurate one, but the estimate, he had gotten rid of his diabetes in days, and pretty powerful. So is LCHF, is low carb, healthy fat, is it a fad diet? It's told all the time, keto, fad diet, carnivore, fad diet. Is it a fad diet? Yes, it is. Food against diabetes. All right? So when people say it's a fad diet, see, I completely agree. Completely agree. It's food against diabetes. So these are just things that you undermine the opposition when they come at you because... So, again, what about the police? All right, well, we're actually being policed at multiple levels, whether or not it's government or it's actually neighbours, friends, government, guideline committees, APRA, Farmers Federation. You just know whoever's trying to police you, giving an opinion, trying to restrict you, though I call them the police. Look, I'm really sorry that I'm actually part of the medical profession. I've retired from clinical practice because I couldn't put up with COVID. But I've still got my registration, still waiting for it to be taken away for things I say. Again, I have a little halo around me, though it doesn't really look like it, but I do, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I just think supposedly critical thinkers, we've been educated along a pathway of read, repeat, reward, question anything, you'll get into trouble. So if you get an email from me that says science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. That's called evolution. That's the scientific method. It's the way we should all live. That's what we're all doing. You're challenging the paradigm because it is our only way forward. And the moment you just start following the guidelines and you sit down there like a dead fish, I'm sorry, that's it. And I think the majority of our health bureaucrats, the bureaucrats, the government all have their heads in the sand. There is one really, really good thing about this. If they keep their heads in the sand for long enough, they are restoring organic matter to the soil. So it's some humour is funny because it's funny. Sometimes it's because it's true. Sometimes because it's uncomfortable. But it's true. I think our regulator, there's one talk, so if you get reported to APRA, please go to YouTube and look at my talk, APRA Throwing Rocks in Glass Houses. It goes through the fact that APRA cannot do its job. And I talk about this regularly, but nonetheless, it's in a talk. If you're worried about the regulator, APRA cannot do it. They're incompetent, they fail the healthcare professionals, they failed the public, and they failed their own staff. They're just a shocking institution. But you could, if you're a farmer, turn to the National Farmers Federation. You could turn to AgForce Queensland. Do you know what their problem is? Really important you work this out, and I've spoken to the industry about this. Half of their members are plant-based and the other half are animal-based. And some of them are stupidly animal-based and plant-based. So half of their production is good for their soil and the other half of their production is bad. And when you point out this obvious thing, they all go, light bulb moment. So National Farmers Federation, forget it, they're not going to help you. Groups that combine all farmers don't help. But you could turn to the meat industry, which really is like trying to organise a stampede. It's like herding cats. There's at least 14 regulatory bodies within the meat industry. Most of the funding goes through MLA. MLA actually doesn't want to be particularly proactive on this front because it's they get government money, so they don't want to be too much against the government because of that. Somehow or other, ended up in the Australian Meat Industry Council annual board meeting as a guest for an hour to actually talk about moving forward in the industry. And I thought it was completely surreal, an orthopedic surgeon talking to the entire meat industry about how to go forward. My proposal to the meat industry to go on the front foot against all the propaganda against them is I'd like them to allocate 0.1% of their budget, of their operating cost of the industry. Research and development, you want 10, 20%. So to the meat industry, I'd like, it's $80 billion industry. I said, $8 million if you give it to me or someone to organise a front foot group to go on, to be proactive, to be doing all the lobbying that needs to be done, $8 million. And I've spoken to a few times, the younger people within the meat industry get it, they want to do it, the older part doesn't. And hopefully that will change over time, but the meat industry is disparate voices. And they asked me to speak at Beef 2024 last year again, I'd spoken before. And they said, can you come up? I said, no, I've told you what you need to do, you haven't done anything. Do you want me to just give the same talk again? I'm not going to do it. It's just me being petty. But I mean, all you can do is lead a horse to water. And I'm sorry that for the farmers here, but lobby the politicians because the people need to do it. So, I'm going to get to the policing of this. So this is my early years. I was that fat kid. I was raised on this healthy combination. My mother had me on diets, but we had margarine. My mum died when I was young, 46 years ago today, actually. So she's looking down on us. And she was well-intentioned, but she died from cancer at a young age. This is me. Not really that obese, but in 1960s that was. And here I was trying to outrun my bad diet, you can't just look at those thighs. There's no way that Belinda couldn't find that attractive. But that was 4 litres of ice cream per week. I can't remember how many wheat bix. I funded Sanitarium a long time ago. And I know here in this picture that everyone looks at the bride first, okay? But I want you to look at that fellow beside her. Look at that red face. I was inflamed. But, she still loves me. So this is where Tasmanian health system is the nation's worst. Well, that's a lie. It's actually the Northern Territory, but Tasmania comes just behind it. I've spent 30 odd years as an orthopedic surgeon. I'm proudly showing something I've helped design knee replacements. And that was, that's what orthopedic surgeons do. But my registrars some years ago gave me, I very proudly have this in my office, it's a golden toilet brush. Because they knew that I got to clean up all the shit. And my clinics on a Friday were called Fettke's effed up fructose-free fungating foot folly Fridays. I never found out what the effed up meant. But nonetheless, that was so I got the worst patients in the hospital in the public system. I looked after most of the northern Tasmanian deep infections and joint replacements, some Tasmanian ones as well. And I said, this is what I can do, but this is what I need you to do. So I was pretty hard on my patients because this is what I was often presented with. It was a rare thing. And this is why it's early in the day and before lunch and, this sort of thing. And as a result, it ends up with this. This fellow had bilateral knee replacements, had to amputate one leg, and I had to fuse his other leg. And I said to him, would you rather have got your diabetes under control than have this? Because I get to meet this person every week for a few years, and we get to actually have a reasonable relationship. And I got a bit sick and tired of all of this, so 15 years ago I realised, well, hang on, maybe this stuff is to blame. Maybe this is why I came up with a nutritional model of modern disease. This is why I start talking about is fruit good or bad for you. This is apparently the go-to video talk in the world, where I just take it apart. And religion's worked against us for a lot of times, but I debated the professor of nutrition for the Defence Department on this topic. About halfway through my talk, he actually conceded defeat. It's been turned into a formal talk here. But I brought up religion. I think, and I'm going to hang on about Belinda's work. Just look up her work about real religion and how we've been completely conflicted over time. So, when I said, what's the original sin? God said, don't pick the fruit off the tree because it's not as good for you as it's advertised to be. Someone remind me to talk about Cain and Abel at the end, okay? So here's my COVID talk. I did a presentation. It's as boring as me talking to a brick wall, but nonetheless, there's so much interesting science in here. I came up with it. If we're going to demonise carbohydrate, what's the toxic dose? It's when it has a negative impact on the system. I'm going to summarise the talk there. 4 grams, 1 teaspoon of carbohydrate has a negative impact on the system. Very low. So along the way, I came up with this, because being proactive, trying to come up with solutions rather than keep complaining. I developed a website, No Fructose. If you go to it, it's completely out of date. I'm too busy. But there's still basic stuff there. This concept of sugar makes you hungry, carbs make you fat, seed oils make you inflamed and sick. Belinda and our youngest daughter convinced me that I need to go on this thing called Facebook. I still remember the little table in San Francisco airport where they convinced me to do it. And cute beard there, but I've never been able to grow a beard. And just to prove I'm a sympathetic guy, if you look at that topic there in the bottom, acts the tampon tax, so I was actually I'm a sensitive guy. However, Coca-Cola don't think that I'm a sensitive guy. Within days of launching the website and the Facebook page, I was attacked by members who were working for Coca-Cola. I've gone to a Coca-Cola conference, stood up and asked questions, and it was really cool because when I stood up and said, Dr. Gary Fettke from Tasmania, the entire audience turned around and said, oh, you know who I am. But because I was on this bandwagon talking about all this, it wasn't long before I came under the influence of the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturers Forum, the heads of Kellogg, Sanitarium, Freedom Foods, Nestle, a couple of minor names there, and the head of the Australian Food and Grocery Council. We're meeting every 3 months at Concord Golf Club to have lunch and discuss strategy for the country. And the topic of food cereal sales were down in Australia and New Zealand, and these 7 people were to be targeted, and I was the only Australian doctor on that list for targeting. And the Dietitians Association of Australia at that time, DAA, now Dietitians Australia, were contracted to, were in a paid agreement to the cereal industry to promote, and Belinda will help me, what's the exact word? Can you hear that? Say it out loud, darling.
Influence, protect, and actively defend cereal grains and even sugars messaging.
So we've got these are the ones writing the dietary guidelines in Australia. Anyway, they're also being paid, and it wasn't long before I was reported to the medical board through the whole union scenario for inappropriately giving advice about reducing sugar. I thought all this was a bit ludicrous. I thought it was a joke for the first year. And ultimately I got reported 3 times to the medical board. And along that way, there were some politicians that were helpful. Understanding when you work with politicians, it's a two-way street. They're after something and you're after something as well. But I presented to the medical complaints process in Australia about how dysfunctional APRA is. You'll find I'll say what I think. It's much easier that way. Ronald Reagan once said it's much easier to tell the truth because it's impossible to remember a lie. And 2016 I presented there, and within 2 hours the medical board came down with a finding against me. 2 hours after I presented, an email came with a finding against me, silencing me. And effectively that meant a medical degree does not qualify doctors to advise patients to avoid sugar. Because I was asked one question. It's a complete kangaroo court. My lawyer could come with me, but he had to sit beside me and not give me any advice. I was asked one question after I gave a 25, I was told I had 30 minutes, but I got in there and said, you got 25 minutes. So I gave a 24-minute, 50-second diatribe defending myself, and the person on the other side, who was extremely obese, but headed the board at that point in time, I'm not kidding, she said, oh, well done, Dr. Fettke, you were 24 minutes and 50 seconds. That's how I happen to know you stayed underneath it. But she asked, they went out, and then half an hour later they came back in, and they said, Dr. Fettke, do you think that advising your patients to reduce sugar is specific medical advice? And I went, yes. My lawyer at the time was going, no. But anyway, I said, no, it is. Anyway, so I was silenced for ever giving that advice, even if everything we're talking about is proven to be best practice. I wrote to the Senate inquiry, Senate team, and said I feel as though I've been bullied and harassed, which was then investigated over the next 4 months, and the finding of in my favour was handed down. So I have my own chapter, matter of parliamentary privilege. So if you bully and harass someone under parliamentary privilege, that's a jailable offence, but you can't jail a statutory body. And but nonetheless, a letter has gone out to every statutory body in Australia saying thou shalt not do that ever again to anyone. So I can say a few things about APRA and really not particularly worry. So I had a gag order on me. So Belinda took over my Facebook page, changed it to Belinda Fettke No Fructose. We just actually wrote it in ink across it originally. I was interviewed because I struggled to be silenced. Andrea Seinfeld from Diet Doctor. I quietly had a chat to a few people in Launceston. We continued with our Fairs is Fat Busters, which was pretty well Biggest Loser on radio, supporting community in a big way. Did that for some years. I think I only appeared in the local rag for only 30 occasions or so. It was on Sunday night where I inappropriately reversed Tony Bennyworth's type 2 diabetes. Got reported to that. The fellow on the right in the top right-hand corner was Michael Mosley's patient. Here's my claim to fame. My patient beat Michael Mosley's patient, and we both smashed the dietitian's patient. It's interesting. I did say to Michael Mosley, what happens after you do 800 calories per day for 8 weeks? And he didn't have any. He said, the 5-2 diet. So why don't we just do low-carb, healthy fat from the time? So I quietly appeared on Catalyst. I was quietly appearing on the 7:30 report, quietly appearing on Four Corners. I've been involved in 4 movies, directly, indirectly. A friend of mine was travelling to Japan, long-haul flight, watching this fat documentary, and was extremely distressed to see my face pop up there and sent me this picture. He was just trying to have a restful trip, but finally... Belinda's work is just amazing. The demonisation of red meat has nothing to do with science, and so she's really come to my side. In fact, a lot of the time stood in front of me. The CSIRO low-carb diet, seen that book? So the CSIRO were able to talk about low-carb, but I wasn't. We're at the airport flying through, but what's really interesting there is one of the 2 authors of that CSIRO low-carb book was in our lounge room 2 years before, and I was explaining it all to her. We've quietly been on YouTube and podcasts, lost track somewhere between 10 and 15 million times, so our reach goes well beyond where we are today. And my social media allows me to reach more people every single day than I'll see in a lifetime of medicine. Very powerful. So thank you to all of you. I was cleared of all these charges. And I thank you, because social media got me into trouble, but social media got me out. The amount of pressure put on at an international level to APRA, just the stupidity of the whole decision, meant that ultimately it was reviewed. I had to go to the National Ombudsman. It was all, and ultimately it was re-reviewed after I'd been reported 3 times, found against me, re-reviewed, and ultimately tossed out in a 6-week review. I was continuing to do foreign aid work in the South Pacific. That's why I'm intimately aware of the amount of problems they've got there. And they don't have a backup service for diabetes. Neither does this place called South Africa. I've spoken there. When you find out that the settlements, all of the shops have Coca-Cola advertising. That's it. And if I go to Vanuatu, it's cheaper to buy a soft drink than it is to buy water. Here's something for little people, okay? Don't be afraid to stand up and do something. Belinda and I presented to 2022 Senate inquiry into... Senate inquiry is actually easy, okay? Just don't panic about them. Just they want to find out information if you give it to them. So we point about food labelling. And many of you may be aware that food labelling from plant-based foods has animals on it. Cows, pigs, and chickens. And 50% of the population are functionally illiterate. 52% of men can read and write functionally, and 48% of women. Scary. So if you can't read that this is a plant-based food, and all you can see is a picture, it's an animal-based product until you prove otherwise. And simply be asked. So the finding from that Senate inquiry there was that all food labelling from the plant-based industry can no longer have animals on it. Hasn't quite come to fruition, but it all takes time. So that's the finding. So I've been a founding member of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners in the United States. Oh, it's international, but it's based in the United States. And in the last couple of years, with a satellite daughter organisation called the Australasian Metabolic Health Society, AMS, has been formed, which is an educational group. It's a supportive group for all healthcare professionals. You don't just have to be doctors, to give you support, ongoing education, ongoing advocacy. So Ron, you here today? Ron Schweitz? There he is. Sorry, Ron's a member of AMS. We just need membership to create sustainability. Fees are cheap, monthly grand rounds, lots of support, and good spot to be. And so if we can get this model right, and we're trying to get this right, it'll be duplicated around the world. That's the whole concept of it. So we have international groups there. So what's the police going to do? They can't come after you now. I've said 93% of the population are insulin resistant who will respond to therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, which equals low carb, keto, carnivore. So National Diabetes Strategy now has low carb, therapeutic carbohydrate reduction in it as a means of doing that, putting type 2 diabetes into remission and reversal. Really, really powerful. So much work to get into it. A whole story around this, but therapeutic carbohydrate reduction has now been endorsed by the Australian Diabetes Society, which is the peak body for dietitians, for endocrinologists in Australia. And Diabetes Australia now has it as best practice. So if you are insulin resistant, 93% of the population, forget the dietary guidelines, this is applicable. Best practice. And even my old friends from the Dietitians Australia have low carbohydrate diets, people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and they're looking for educational material supplied to them now by the recently formed Australasian Metabolic Health Society. If you're looking for a book that wants all the scientific evidence, all of the articles that support this ketogenic carnivore diet, this book called Ketogenic from the Noakes Foundation Nutrition Network. Sean Baker and I wrote the chapter on orthopedics. I think I did 90% of that, but anyway. Just got to bag him out when he's not here to defend himself. So and we're using that, if healthcare professionals say, oh, have you got any references to support? Here's a whole effing textbook with it. It is. But if you can't afford that, but you're actually looking for specific nutritional advice, well, you can go to Women's Weekly. So we're there. And if you can't even afford to get down to the grocery store, but you can afford to go to the grog shop, here in Australia, beer drinking capital of the world, we have multiple low-carb beers there. I'm not advocating alcohol. If you're trying to lose weight, trying to get healthier, alcohol is not beneficial, but we are winning. So what are we? New dietary guidelines: eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food based on your culture and environment, reducing added sugar and processed food. I say it in my sleep. I also say this in my sleep. Sugar makes you hungry, carbs make you fat. Polyunsaturated soils make you inflamed and sick. This is why I want you to try and remember that. So is it safe to eat real food? Well, we've got to think about the health of the soil, healthy plants, animals, food. Definitely gives us healthier people. So I do believe it is safe to eat real food for the land, the people, and ignore the police. Margaret Mead: a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. I do have a confession to make at the end of all of this. I am a vegetarian, but I know it's not healthy for me, and I need to supplement. So I am a carno, ovo, lacto, pesco, pollo vegetarian. I supplement with meat, eggs, cheese, fish and chicken. Welcome to my table. Only dead fish swim with the current. I wrote this book. I still live by this. If you want to be a dead fish, just go along with everyone else. Science evolves because it is challenged, not because it is followed. Thank you very much.